I also did public service announcements. So I went on a local UConn radio station, and I talked about issues that Wales were facing and what people could do. And then from there, like Heather said, I had a little break when I was like 8 or 9 or 10, like around that age. And then after that, I kind of got re-involved. I started learning more about, issues that Wales were facing, because there are a lot of them. So I learned more. And then when I was 12, I was like, I really think I need to try and get more young people involved. I think that we can have a bigger impact together. And so I started a youth group focused on whale issues. And I ran that for a couple of years, and that was great. But at some point, I started college when I was like 13, and then it was getting more intense. I was taking more classes at 14, and I felt like I was the only one driving the group and coming up with new ideas, and it just got really hard. And so we decided to stop and to disband. And then shortly after that, I didn't take a very long break at all there.
Your breaks, by the way, are what adults would like take years. You take like a little kind of a minute break. So yeah, that's fantastic. But before you keep going, tell us a little bit about you being 13 years old in college.
Yeah, so that's kind of a whole nother story, but I was homeschooled by my parents until the age of 13. And then at that point, I had this really amazing choice between going to high school and going to community college. And so I made the decision to go to community college actually because of my activism, and because I felt that going to college early would allow me to spend more time on my activism than like a normal high school where you have to be there like 7 hours. And it also allows me to finish college quicker, so I can also get out, and get a regular job and all of that faster. And I hope that that job will allow me to continue this work more effectively.
Yeah, that's just amazing. Does anyone want to jump in or have any comments before we kind of move on? I was really like totally blown away when you think about, the Monopoly board game, like pass go, like Sena literally passed high school, like in 2 seconds on her little like break. So feel free to jump in or comment or ask questions as we kind of go along. It's just really, 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 really amazing what you've accomplished. So from there, bring us through a little bit, because when we were talking, and Sena's just so amazing when we're having these conversations. I actually had to stop her at times because my brain was trying to catch up to what she was saying. She says it so nonchalantly about, gathering 1,500 people in this kind of a movement. So anyway, take it from there, Sena. Okay. I want to, yeah.
Yeah, so like I was saying, when I was 14, I read about the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, which for me, the kind of like really shocking number that jumped out at me was the fact that we had 12 years, now 10, to really stop the climate crisis and like the most disastrous effects. And so I was shocked, and I kind of went back to that same thing that I had when I was 5, when I was like, I don't know what to do. Like I'm too young. I can't vote. Like, what do I do? But at that point, I was really excited. I found the Sunrise Movement. My dad actually sent me an article about it, and that was kind of how I first found out. And so Sunrise is a youth-led organization, and they consider youth to be age 35 and under. And from there, I got more involved. I went to the national meetings, and then I started going to the local stuff. And I started co-directing communications. At first was what I did, and now I co-direct the organization with another college student. And also I meant to say, Sunrise's mission statement is to stop climate change and create millions of good jobs in the process. So we're really centered around a Green New Deal at a federal level, but then also at a local or state level, we also work on those kind of like legislation and bills and progressive politics. And so we have our national organization, but then we also have over like 350 hubs, they're called. So basically just like small groups of Sunrisers. And so I co-direct Sunrise Connecticut, and we focus mostly on like state politics and state actions. And so last year, over the summer, myself and the other co-director of Sunrise Connecticut, Mitchell Kaviter, who's also a college student, we got involved with this coalition of organizations, 90 plus organizations, called the Connecticut Climate Crisis Mobilization. And Greta Thunberg had put out a call for a global day of action on September 20th. And so, in Connecticut, we want to pick up that call and hold our own climate strike. And so C3M, which is the shorthand for Connecticut Climate Crisis Mobilization, decided that they were going to organize it. But when we walked into that room, Mitchell Kavita and I, we were kind of the youth there, the only young people. And so we really kind of took it up to be the youth leaders for this event. And so it was amazing. Like Heather said, we turned out like 1,500 people to this event, which is crazy. It was like the biggest day around climate change since the original Earth Day in like 1972 in Connecticut. So we were really excited at the turnout. And then after kind of the main portion of the event with the speakers, we about maybe like 100 of us went upstairs to the governor's office. And we delivered a letter to him, really laying out our demands for the event and also asking that he meet with us, because we really felt like that was the next step for this action. And so we delivered that, and then we left. And I was really excited because I had no idea how many people were going to turn up. So to have over 1,000 people show up was just crazy. And I was excited, but I was also starting to get nervous because as I reached out to the governor over and over again and he never responded, I really started to wonder, like, what will it take for him to respond? Because 1,500 of his constituents showed up like outside of his office, and he never really responded to us. And so at that point, we decided, myself and Mitch, to plan another climate strike. But the kind of big difference was that it wasn't C3M organizing this one, it was Sunrise Connecticut. And so it was really just the two of us trying to gather as many students and supporters as possible at the Capitol. And so it was a smaller event. We had about 500 people, but it was still really exciting because it was mostly young people, which a lot of times events in Connecticut, it's like not like that. Even like September 20th, it was a lot of young people, but not that many. But December 6th, the next strike that we planned, it was like 90% youth, specifically high school students. So that was just so exciting. And then again, we went up to the governor's office. We delivered another letter, and we were like, so we're still demanding these things. We added another demand. We asked for a meeting. And then, following up on that event, I went home. I was excited at what we'd accomplished, but I was still nervous because I was like, well, what now? Like, I can't keep planning strikes forever. When is he going to respond? And then a couple days after the event, the governor actually called Mitch, and then a week later, he also called me to really talk a little bit more about our demands. And so that was really exciting because I was like, wow, like, we got a response. This is crazy. But unfortunately, since then, we haven't actually seen like any action kind of backing up those phone calls or our demands. So it's kind of just like a constant work in progress of pushing him and trying to work with him. And it's, it's complicated, but we're working on that right now. Do you want me to keep going, Heather, or do you want me to pause?
Yeah, no, you keep
I just
going.
applaud your courage and your willingness to go back for more and back for more. And the fact that you and your cohort can bring a crowd of 1,500 people together at the in Hartford, on what looks like a sunny September day, is a huge sort of testimonial to the fact that a lot of people care about it.
Yeah.
And I'm just interested as to whether you got any specific pain points or responses from the governor, or what kind of like what happened next, I guess, is my question.
Yeah, so we had delivered a very long list of demands. Like September 20th, it was, like I said, put together by this coalition. And so it was kind of like a laundry list. But our main demand was that the governor declare a climate emergency for the state of Connecticut. And then we wanted that emergency backed up by action items. And so that was our original demand. And then on December 6th, we added to that demand by asking that the governor provide a youth seat on the Governor's Council on Climate Change. And so the Governor's Council on Climate Change, or GC3, is this council that is basically just providing recommendations to the governor on what he should be doing around climate change. And the way that it's structured is that there's like the council that votes and decides to send the thing to him. And then below that, there are all these working groups and subcommittees. And so I'm on a working group, and I chaired a subcommittee over the summer. But the thing is, there's no young person actually on the committee or on the council itself who's voting and deciding what to send to the governor. And so we were really pushing him there. And in terms of follow-up from the governor, when he called us, he sounded excited about like energy efficiency and renewable energy, which was great because those are things that like I'm excited about too, and I'd love to see Connecticut do more on. But like I said, it wasn't backed up by action. And then we saw him at a town hall that he held at Eastern Connecticut State University, and we asked him a question specifically, are you going to give youth a seat on the Governor's Council on Climate Change? And the lieutenant governor was there as well, and she knew what we were asking. And so she said, well, let's just give them a seat here. And so he said, okay, now Mitchell Kaviter, who was on asking the question, he's like, okay, you're appointed to the council, which was a nice thing to say, but it was, again, not followed up by action. So it just feels like a lot of kind of empty promises, I guess. And I'm hoping that GC3, like I said, I was involved with those recommendations. I'm hoping that he's going to really take those and actually implement them. And I hope that they don't get watered down by the council itself. But I mean, we'll see. We'll keep providing public comment, but there's not a whole lot we can do once the council itself has it.
Are you working with the high schools and colleges, the schools in the area, or how broad are you? I mean, the entirety of New England, just Connecticut?
Sunrise, the Sunrise Movement, you mean, or myself, or?
Just your organization.
Yeah. So
right. Yes. Well, both. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So Sunrise is a national organization. So working with people or young people, colleges, high schools, everybody across the nation, middle schools as well. Here in Connecticut, I have a pretty strong connection with quite a few high schools, especially. Like I've found that honestly, high school students are easier to mobilize than college students, because college students seem a little like stuck on the college campus, and I'm like, you can leave, like you'll be okay. But high school students seem really excited to get engaged and to go to events. So I have, I have a good connection with a lot of high schools across the state, and I have reached out to all of them. And then, I have a good connection with UConn because I go there, and so I know a lot of the students, or a lot of the environmental students at least there. But as far as the rest of them, it's, it's constantly just kind of trying to work it out, and then people graduate and it gets more complicated. But I'm also meeting a lot of teachers and presenting in school, so that's also a really good way I've found to connect with students.
Who's your initial contact when you say they have these connections with the high school center? That's really interesting. Like, how do you actually approach the schools?
Well, it differs by school. So like E.O. Smith, which is the high school in my town, it was really easy because my sister goes there. And so it was, relatively easy to speak with one of her teachers, and he invited me to come in and speak about climate change. So a lot of times I'll do it that way, where there's a student who will kind of initiate things. A lot of the teachers, especially like the social science teachers, also are really excited about this kind of stuff and want someone to talk to their kids about like activism or politics or whatever. And so then they'll reach out to me, which that makes things really easy. But when someone's not reaching out to me and I have to do the reaching out, a lot of times I'll reach out to someone like a social science teacher, someone who runs a club who might be kind of related to this kind of thing. Once in a while, maybe a principal if there's no one else, but that's like kind of a dead end most of the time. So that's kind of been my main way, I think, of reaching out to people.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's really interesting. And then what is their main topics? Has it with the climate? What are the schools doing at that level to really make a change? What do you see?
So I think when I go into the schools, it's mostly talking about what can the students do outside of school. So how can they affect, personally, I'm really into politics and how we can change things from that side. So I generally talk about how can you go and talk to your legislature, like something like that. But also, taking it to the personal level, like what can you do at home? And for me, at least, I think of what you can do at home is kind of a way to empower yourself and be like, yeah, like I can make a difference. And then from there, I like to take that to the political level and be like, okay, now how do we talk to legislators and make sure they're going to back up our actions at home with legislation. And so I kind of talk about that with students and specifically saying like, yeah, I can't vote either, but here's what we can do instead. Here's who we can go lobby, and here's what we can lobby them about. And so that's usually what I try and talk to students about, but in like not non-political terms, but making sure I'm not mentioning party or anything like that. Schools don't like that. So.
Do you see that there's like a greater excitement building in the schools with the traction we're getting from the youth mentors in this segment?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, so I guess I really only started I talked to some schools maybe before the age of 14, but after that is when I started talking to a lot of them. Mm-hmm. And I think that there is more energy now. I'm also talking to kids who are a little bit older now. Before it was mostly like middle and mostly elementary school. So it's just like a different kind of dynamic. But yeah, I think that there is a lot of excitement. I think that there's more awareness, of all age groups around this kind of issues. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of excitement. And I think kids they're ready to do something. They want to do something, but a lot of times it's like they just don't know what to do. Or they think that they're too young to do, which is something I'm always like, you're not too young. Like you can go do something,
So what are some recommendations that you give? Because that's so common that we hear, right? It's, I can't vote. I don't have a voice. What is my voice? What does it really matter? Like, how does my voice matter? What are some suggestions that you give?
Yeah, so usually, I talk about something like last year, Sunrise Connecticut held a youth lobby day where we specifically reached out to high school students and also some college students. And we brought them to the Capitol and specifically gave them the opportunity to speak with legislators because we wanted to make it very clear that you can talk to them even though you're too young to vote. And so that is usually what I talk about, like how do you talk to legislators? Because it seems scary, but like it's not, and you can do it. Or how do you write a letter? That was something we did last year. I met with a whole bunch of high school students and they all wrote letters about climate education and why they thought it was important and why they wanted the state legislature to pass a bill requiring it. And so those are the kind of things that I try and do. Or how do you call like the governor's office, let's say, or the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection and ask for something. And so there's steps that seem, I think, really intimidating. And honestly, sometimes I'm still intimidated when I like call somebody. But once you start doing it, it gets easier and it becomes clear how you can influence laws or legislation or whatever.
I had a question for you. How do you think this year has affected the kind of the momentum, particularly within the high school population? I mean, I imagine college kids can kind of, navigate around stuff a little bit more, but high school seems like there's a lot going on in their world right now.
Right. I mean, COVID has definitely made it a lot more difficult because there's just not the same energy online. It's still good, but it's just different. So I think that has definitely made it a little bit more difficult. We can't hold climate strikes or anything like that, which was a really good way to like energize people because, the people who show up to a climate strike already support you, but they just need that energy. And so that's something that we can't do anymore, which is more difficult. But, having seen the protests, the racial protests over the summer, I think high school students are energized, I think that there were a lot of students who wanted to get out there or who did get out there and protest. And so in terms of that, I think students are ready and they see the problems, they want to do something about them. And it's just a matter of making sure that they have like the resources and the ability to take action.
What I find most interesting, Sena, is this beautiful bridge that you represent from the youth all the way to the legislative. So can you share with the group a little bit about what's your plans or Sunrise's plans for the upcoming legislation session?
Yeah, for sure. So last January, the legislative session had started and we had kind of identified our three main focuses for the session, which were expanded energy efficiency and renewable energy, because that's the direction that we're headed. No new fossil fuel infrastructure, which makes sense, but unfortunately Connecticut's in the process of trying to build a new frac gas power plant in Killingly, Connecticut, which like doesn't make any sense because we don't really need it. but it's still continuing anyway. So we had that bill, and then the one that I'm most excited about is ensuring climate education in all public schools, which is something that right now is like recommended by the next generation science standards, but is not required. And so we want to change that to a requirement to make sure that every student in Connecticut, regardless of where they're living or what district they're in, is getting that education. And so we had started that lobbying process. We had gotten the climate education bill to a public hearing, and we had a lot of students come and testify. But then COVID happened and everything shut down. So now as the session starts back up, there's a lot of momentum around the climate education bill. And I'm hopeful that we'll get that passed this year. And so we're really planning to just kind of stick to the same priorities as last year and push those bills again. But also, seeing what else is going on, who other, what bills other folks are pushing. And there's an organization called Renew Connecticut, which is really focused on a Green New Deal for Connecticut. And so as they start to kind of develop bills, right now they're more like proposals, we'll definitely be looking at those and probably supporting those as well.
Yeah, interesting. And I love how, of course, you're most passionate out of those three is the education, because that's really how you started, right? With the farmers market and educating individuals on climate. So that's really awesome to kind of see how everything's looped back. So Sena, a lot of our community, or the majority of our community, is small business owners or individuals that really resonate with our 4 principles of conscious capitalism: purpose, stakeholder, culture, leadership. So with that, and with that whole small business kind of feel, how can environmental activists either better support small business, or how can we support environmentalists as small business owners?
Yeah, for sure. So in terms of environmental activists or climate activists supporting small businesses, I do think that is something that we as activists could try and prioritize a little bit more. Just thinking about our organizations and our structure, I think that is something that we need to honestly just think about more when coming up with plans and proposals and all of that. And then also making sure that when we're planning an action or whatever it is, that we're thinking about how can we, whether it be buy from local businesses or collaborate with local businesses, and really just try and focus more on that than maybe we have been in the past. And then in terms of small businesses supporting environmental activists and activism, I guess I would say, one thing that I've seen, especially when working with my town, because I worked with the town council on a plastic bag ban, and now I'm working on a climate emergency resolution. Something that people regularly say to me is, well, what about the small businesses? How is it going to impact the small businesses? And that's a really big concern that they have. And so I guess I would say to small business leaders that your voice and your business has a lot of power, and it's very like business or legislators and lawmakers are concerned about it. And so having you come up and say, as a small business owner, I support this, I believe climate action is important, that is really powerful. And I grew up on a farm, so I saw my parents run a small business for 8 years while growing up. And when my mom would go to the town council and say, as a small business owner, I support a plastic bag ban or whatever it was, I do think that was powerful, and I think that held a certain weight that just coming as an individual didn't.
I had a thought or a question, I don't know. So I live in Ridgefield, Connecticut, and I recently joined a group called the Ridgefield Action Committee for the Environment. And so it turns out a lot of towns have some group like that is working on sustainability and that kind of thing within the town. And Ridgefield is one of the more affluent towns in Connecticut. It's in Fairfield County, and yet what blows me away is that there's only one of the school buildings that so far has replaced its lights with LEDs. Just as a tiny example. So to be done to improve the infrastructure at the schools. The air conditioning system's really old. The heating systems are old. The windows, aren't double or triple pane windows. It's just a big mess. But getting people motivated to do something about it is such a challenge, like to get the first selectman to like, approve some things, get some stuff done. Let's put some solar panels on the roof. Let's do some of these things. It's like pulling teeth.
Mhm.
And I was joking with one of the other people in the committee the other day saying, I said, what I want to do is buy like a whole pile of cases of light bulbs. Not that this would work, but, buy, a bunch of cases of LED bulbs, get some Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Brownies, Cub Scouts, or whatever, have them show up at the door on a Saturday to the, and tell this, the building superintendent, look, we're here to replace the light bulbs.
Yeah.
And just like shame everybody into like, like we what are we doing? So I guess, and hearing you talk about the students and the schools and things like that, I'm thinking that, and what you're doing is awesome. And I'm also thinking that there might be students who may not want to like, try to be doing legislative stuff, but, with a science teacher in the school, like, let's do a school audit, and there's companies that will, help you do an energy usage assessment or whatever like that in your building. Wouldn't that be a great science class to be part of an energy usage assessment going through your school building? Where, how much energy are we using? Where is it going? What's happening? What can we do better? And, and then put together a proposal and hand that into the town and say, look, this is what we could be doing. We could be saving all this money. We've got a climate emergency. We got to be, let's get this stuff done, and have the students actually submit that, I think would go a long way to shaming some people essentially into like getting their butts in gear. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I mean, so I know a bunch of the students who go to the local high school with my sister, and one of them honestly was trying to do that. She wanted to know, when do we have our energy assessment? What, how many solar panels do we have? How much energy are they providing? And the school would not work with her. They were very difficult, would not get back to her emails, would not, give her the information. And so there are also those kind of barriers where, sometimes the school doesn't really want students, but
yeah, so that's when I think that's when you have a strike.
Yeah.
And like really make it flaming obvious. It's like, how come, where are the electric school buses? Where I don't, whatever, and just start really, and be, if and hopefully there's a science teacher or somebody can help people out with the, with the adding things up and everything. But, where's the cost, have a serious cost benefit analysis. This is a plan. These things would all pay for themselves within 5 years. They're like a no-brainer. Why aren't we doing this?
Mm-hmm.
That kind of stuff, and just really, and writing letters to the paper and all that kind of thing. But there's stuff in there for everybody, so there's people who like to write letters, the people who like to lead a, action group, the science nerds who want to like crunch the numbers. There's stuff in there for everybody to get involved. So just to, it'd be really cool.
I agree.
Gavin, as a science nerd, I take that as a compliment. Okay. Just want to let you know, Gavin, that as of yesterday, I replaced the last LED bulb in my house with an LED. That was my project this week. I could not believe how many light bulbs I had in my house.
Yeah, yeah.
I would say, I think I replaced about 70 light bulbs.
Yeah.
And I had already replaced some before that. But I do agree with you. I think there's a couple of things I was trying to understand here. It sounds like you have a very good handle on, Sena, on the idea of activism.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of educating students on activism. It sounds like you've done a really good job where students have reached out to you. You've been able to reach out to the students. You've been able to teach them. We'll call it basic activism in terms of who to contact, how to contact them, how to put some soft political pressure and leverage ideas towards action. You identified 3 measures for this year.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be interesting, and I think this goes back to Gavin's point. It'd be interesting to have a scoreboard. You are what you measure. You talked about right now, hey, our goal is 0 new fuel emitting plants. Well, right now we're at 0, so we're hitting the target, but there's 1 in progress. So, that's your score there. I like the idea. The other 2 you had. What were the other 2 again?
climate education and expanded energy efficiency and renewable.
Okay, so on the climate education, if you take and you literally have the students at their school report back to you and say, hey, Smith, it's a mandatory course, or it's voluntary, and this, and you could literally come up with a score that would show a trend over a period of time as to how many schools are actually educating their students, good or bad, in some level of climate change knowledge and education. So at least you'll have a score. And then the same thing with respect to what Gavin's saying in terms of, hey, how green is our school? And I think you come up with 4 or 5 measures, whether have we done LEDs? I'm from Hamden. I know the high school has a fuel cell. They don't have solar panels. I would doubt they have CFC or LEDs. So, but I think those are pieces of information that you can sort of report back to the towns to give them some peer pressure from their local, hey, look, Wallingford's done all this. Hamden, what are you doing? I think having the information, I think, is a very powerful thing, and it allows the students the first level of interaction at a local level. And I think you would get a lot more parents involved, because they can, once people sort of see, okay, if I do A and B will happen, as opposed to I do A and we hope something down the line, maybe somewhere somebody will, the governor will do something. It's a lot bigger ask, and it's a lot harder to keep people involved, right, except other than when you have that sort of laser focus on a great idea. You certainly generated a tremendous amount of enthusiasm and focus and energy, and you want to keep that going. So I applaud you for that.
Yeah, and actually, just kind of what popped into my head too as you're talking is like all these, not now because of the whole pandemic, but the football teams, the baseball teams going competing with all the other schools, and all this other stuff. I mean, you could have a climate action team in your school competing with some neighboring towns climate action thing, and like, what's my score on my building? What things have I done? And actually compete on things, plus sharing ideas and everything too. So in the process and stuff. So it could just be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Are there climate action teams out there in the schools? That's like an interesting idea, Gavin. That sounds really fun.
Yeah, there are a lot of. I think most schools have like an eco club or something.
Okay.
And maybe some of them, well, one are not probably very engaged, and two, maybe are not doing the kind of actions that you guys are talking about, but I think that most schools have something, they have students who are interested in this and maybe just need some help figuring out like what to do or how to do these kind of things. Because I know for me, like I have a hard time setting up these kind of very data focused things. Like I'll go to my parents because they're both engineers, so they'll help me set it up. But
they're smart people there, Gavin. You see that?
Yeah. Well, that's the beauty of something like this is me from a team. It's a bunch of different people, different personalities, different skills, and you put it all together, and all that magic happens. So yeah, definitely.
I think it's a great suggestion, Paul, and I really like the idea that if it's high school related, then kids will learn from the collaboration and the new science involved in that, and they will take that on as they grow. And as we know, young high school kids have got a very long runway, so they can adopt this mindset at an early stage in their education. Then it will infuse in their career moves later on. But Sena, I had a question for you about the sort of the framework of climate action globally, really. So it's a big question. But how do you think it's framed? Like when we were putting the business summit together early this year, I was sort of pitching it to a few sort of industry organizations, talking about the summit and how it'd be good if you get involved, because there's a lot of work in job creation and things like that. And some of them were reacting was kind of weird. They were saying, well, if it's climate action, it's to do with the EPA, and we have a history of being told what to do, and regulation and heavy regulation. And so all these red flags went up because it was based on some bad experience that had in the past. I mean, so and when we were trying to create the narrative for the Climate Action Summit, we were trying to bring the activists with the business people and get them in the same room to talk about how there's work to be done, and there's a lot of jobs involved in doing the work. So how can we change the narrative in a way that gets more traction with, obviously, if you can get 1,500 people together, it's not, the problem is not in the younger mindset, but it's more in the business owners. How can we shift that to be get more traction?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's really just about talking, like shifting the conversation, first of all, to maybe focus a little like less on the regulation side, and more on the, we are going to need, thousands of new or millions of new jobs to build all of this wind power and this solar power and all this new green infrastructure that we're talking about, right? Like, that's not just going to happen. We need more jobs. We're going to need businesses and employers and all of that. And so I think it's just shifting that conversation a little bit, and knowing the audience, I think, is a really big thing, because I know, like, if I'm talking to people like myself, I'm not going to talk about that, because that's not the kind of thing that's going to get me engaged or involved. But if I'm talking to business leaders, then yeah, we need to shift to really focus more on that side of things. And so I think it's just about shifting that. And, in the media or whatever, when we're hearing about the Green New Deal or other climate legislation, it's kind of usually framed a certain way, especially, if we're looking at the more right-wing media, they always frame it in a very specific way. And so I think it's just kind of trying to go to those people and shift how they're talking about it as well, which obviously is not an easy thing to do, but I think that's kind of maybe how we can start, and just talking about it in a more positive way, and instead of like, here's the doom and gloom, like our whole world's going to go up in flames. Like, instead of talking about it like that, let's talk about the jobs that we're going to create and the cleaner air and the cleaner water. Like, let's talk about that side of it. So that's, yeah, I don't know. Did that answer your question?
It's because we're doing the summit again in 2021. So I'm trying to pick the right words that are more of a call to action. I mean, climate change is a bit benign, global warming is a bit benign. So what? And yet the consequences of not doing anything are so profound. So I'm just trying to reconcile those two things.
Yeah, I mean, I always start by calling it the climate crisis, because for me, at least, crisis, brings it to an elevated sense of urgency. And, for some people, the doom and gloom definitely does work. I mean, the scary numbers were what got me involved. And so they do, in that sense, they do work. But I think that those scary numbers have to be followed up by what can you do about these scary numbers, and not just here's the bad news. And so maybe trying to frame it like that, like, here is this really serious problem that if we don't do something about right now, like, us and our children and our grandchildren are going to be in a lot of trouble. But here's the flip side, like, here's what we can do. Here's what you as a business person can do, and kind of framing it that way as well.
I think for business people, I think the question is, what can I do without destroying my livelihood? Mm-hmm. And I think it comes down to task oriented or specifics, as opposed to a grand idea. When you talk in, I always look at my daughter's I don't know if it's vegan or whatever, and every dinner is an experience. Well, like, okay, we got this, no, I can't eat that because of this, and everything's a can't. And it's like, okay, as opposed to, well, what can I do then? Okay, and what is delicious, and what can be, what are the benefits of doing all these things? It's the same thing from a climate perspective. People know, okay, we can do these three things. It doesn't impact your job. It's a positive experience, and you've reduced your energy consumption by 10% or 15% by participating, and it's a win-win for everybody. You could still tackle the tougher problems, moving from, we'll call it the fossil fuel to the renewable energy. Is going to be painful for some people along the way, but you have to provide some level of transition. But it starts with let's get the stuff that gives the people a positive feel, and that you can buy in on a gradual basis, as opposed to you must be 110% committed to start with. And I think that's what scares people off, is you either are all in or you're not in at all. I think Greta Thunberg had to travel across the ocean by renewable energy boat or something like that to get to the US. Otherwise, she was going to be considered a hypocrite. And you know, we've sort of boxed ourselves in a lot of ways, rather than saying, yeah, you know what, there's a transition period, and we got to be effective in how we transition, not how pure are we to begin with.
Mhm.
I'm curious if only one of your demands can be met this year. I know that's might be heartbreaking, but if only one can, you know, which one would it be?
I think I'd probably say the no new fossil fuel infrastructure, just because this Killingly power plant is like right on the horizon and is so close to having all the permits. And so I'd probably say that. With that said, the bill would probably be more nuanced on that. And so it might not stop this one because it's already so far along in the process. But let's say it was going to stop it, that would be the one I'd probably choose, because I think we have more energy around the climate education and renewable energy and energy efficiency. And so in some ways, I think that they would be easier to push through in 2022, let's say.
Makes sense. Well, I hope more than one gets accomplished this year.
Me too.
It's always hard on that list though, like just to choose one. Well, I know we're coming up to the top of the hour. It goes by so fast when we're having a great time. Sena, thank you so much for joining us. I'm gonna put your contact information in the chat as well. And then I wanna turn it over to Glenn for maybe some final closing remarks. I know next year we're coming up on some holidays. So do you wanna give us a little brief update on what's the schedule to meet maybe next week or week after?
Thanks, Heather. Yeah, and really enjoyed your conversation, your story, your 5-year-old kickoff, and your 13-year-old graduation to college is I'm so excited for you because you've got such a great life ahead of you, and these you're obviously very skilled at the activism and education piece, and you know the world needs more people like you that are really focused on these kind of issues. You know, we don't need more stuff. We need to change the conversation a lot. So I'm really delighted to have you in the room today and to hear more about your story.
No, that was great, and definitely Sena, I'm going to get in touch with you and I don't know, see what I can do to stir the pot here in town. So,
Thank you.
That sounds exciting. Gavin stirring the pot. I love that. And teamed up with Sena. Go ahead, Sena. I cut you off.
No, yeah, I was just saying thank you. I really appreciate it, and I'm really glad that we got to talk today.